Hello, my name is Dino Wieland, and today I'll be giving you a demo of the basic editing experience inside of Python tools for Visual Studio. We'll be looking at both the IntelliSense and the code navigation features. First, I'm going to start off by creating a new project. You can see here that I have a bunch of different projects to choose from. Some of these you may have available, some of you may not, depending on whether or not you have IronPython and the HPC pack installed on your machine. I'm going to start off and select the Python application here. So here you can see my solution is now created, and I have an empty program.py file that just contains this print hello world. One of the first things I'm going to do is select which interpreter this is actually working against. You can see I have a bunch of different Python versions installed here. I'm going to go ahead and select Python 2.7. This step isn't strictly necessary. If you don't specify the interpreter in the project properties, we'll just use the default interpreter that's configured in Tools Options. Next, I'm going to show you some of the import completions. I'm going to start off by typing import, and you can see that there's a long list of modules that are available. These are based upon the analysis of your Python distribution. So I'm going to just show you import sys. I can also get imports by doing from import, where I get the list of names that are available, and I get some useful descriptions of the various functions that I'm importing. I can do sys dot, and we'll get some information there. I can do a call on these functions, and you can see that I get not only help on the parameters, but I get useful descriptions of what the function itself is going to be doing. Next, let's look at the experience of editing some functions and classes. So I'm going to start off with writing a simple function here, give it a doc string, and have it return the value that's passed into it. We can see when I call the function that I get parameter help, so I can just pass in a string here. And then if I dot through the result, we understand that I've passed in a string and I'm getting back the result of a string, and therefore we get string completions. If I were to change this code so that instead I passed in an integer and then dotted through that, we'd understand that this was an integer that I was working with, and you get the integer results instead. Also, when I call this function with a value, not only do we understand the return values, but you can also see I can go into the function, and here I can understand the values within the function as well. So not only do we propagate the types in, we propagate the types out when we're doing this code analysis. Okay, so let's now look at classes. So I'm going to get rid of that function definition and define a simple class here. First I'll give it an initialization method, and we will go ahead and store foo there. Let's give it some doc strings with helpful information, and let's give it a function definition here that, similarly to the function definition earlier, just returns what's passed in. I'm going to construct an instance of this, and you can see that we give you the signature help on the init method and the doc string. Let's go ahead and pass in 42 there, and we can see that we recognize the foo member, and we understand that that's an integer. So I can dot through that and get completions there. So now let's call the f method, and we'll just do a.f, and we'll pass in a string for foo there. And you can see that, like before, I get the completions and understand that this function is returning a string. I can also come here and pass in a list here, and now we understand that this is going to return either a string or a list, and therefore the only valid methods that we're going to get back on it that we can call are count or index, because those are the two methods that are in common between a string and a list. If I wanted to change this behavior, I could go to Tools, Options, and go down to Python within Text Editor, go to the Advanced page, and uncheck the member completion displays intersection of members. Now I'll get the full completions for both list and string here. So that's the basic experience of working with functions and classes, but let's look at working with something that's very useful in Python, and that's the common container types. Python Tools for Visual Studio has a great understanding of these core data types and how the functions on them work. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and just construct a list here, which is going to have a tuple in it with some information. And that's going to be the person's name, their age, and their height. So all of this is loosely typed within Python, but we actually know that this is a tuple here at index 0. We know that index 1 is also a tuple. And if I were to go into the John element, the name element, you can see that we know that's a string. We know that the integer 1 is an integer. And the third one is a float. So we've understood all of these core data types. And this analysis flows through. So if I were to do something like this, where I'm unpacking the tuples through a for loop, we understand that name is a string, that age is an integer, and that height is a floating point value. Similar to lists and tuples, we also have a deep understanding of dictionaries. So here I'm just going to go ahead and construct a dictionary. I will put a value into it, and if I use a method on it such as pop, we will understand that when I pop the value, I get an integer back. Pop's not the only method that we have a deep understanding of course. I can do something like call the values on it, and I can go ahead and index into that because it's going to return a list of values, and as I dot through that, we even understand that that was a list of integers. Okay, so now I'm going to actually move on to a different project here, and we're going to show some of the browsing features rather than the editing features. So I launch Visual Studio with my new project, and you can see here we go. So this is a Python library that's available externally that's called Beautiful Soup. The first thing I'd like to point out here is the availability of the navigation bar. This lets you quickly jump around your source file from location to location based upon what classes and functions are defined throughout the file. So here's the main Beautiful Soup class. I can jump down to other classes that are related to the HTML parsing that this library does, and so on. This just lets you quickly move around. Once I'm within a class, I can select a function within that class. And it's a common feature that you might be used to if you used Visual Studio with C# before, or Visual Basic. So in addition to the navigation bar, we have some features that are really good if you want to look through the code and see how it's actually being used. So I'm going to start off here. I'm going to look for this find1 function. You can see that we understand what self is, and that find1 is a method on page element objects, and it returns none or an object. I'm going to go ahead and do goToDefinition here. I could have just pressed F12, which is easier, but for the purpose of the demo, it's a little bit nicer to see this happening. You can see that I can hover here on this function now, and I get information about the parameters, what people have called this with. And in particular, when I'm hovering on method, it's kind of nice because I can not only see information about what type was passed in, but I can also see information about the exact methods that were passed in. And you'll see this a little bit better if I do find all references. Here we give you the location where the method variable is defined. Here we give you the location where method is actually called, and these are actually values that are getting passed in for the method. So not only do I know that this is getting passed a function, which in C# would be like a delegate, but I actually know the specific functions that are being passed in. Even better yet, if I try to call method within here, I will actually get signature help for all of the different values that are being passed in here. So I can really understand what methods I'm going to be calling, what parameters they take, and whether the values that I will be passing in will actually work with all of those different methods that are being passed in here. So finally, if I wanted to get a higher level view of my code, I can use the Visual Studio Object Browser feature. This will actually let me drill into the individual Python file and from here I can see all of the classes that are available. I can select the individual classes, I can see the doc strings down here that describe classes, I can see their various members, and this will give me a great feel for the structure of the code and might give me some ideas about how I'd want to go ahead and use this if I were consuming these APIs. Well, that's it for the basic editing experience. I hope you learned something new today. Thanks.